The Pokemon series of video games is the third highest selling game franchise of all time, and at the time of recording there are currently 8 generations that have been created over a 24-year time span. Starting from humble beginnings on the original Game Boy, the series, much like its eponymous creatures, has evolved drastically over time. The series has seen the rise of new technologies and game development capabilities, allowing it to grow and become ever more elaborate as time goes on. The Pokemon community itself has also changed. Those who were children when it first came out are now into their 30s and 40s. And yet it's always managing to bring in new fans with each generation. As someone who has always loved Pokemon since the first time I put my hands on the controls, I've often felt that the series has unfortunately been a bit up and down at times, which of course is not inherently a bad thing, because that can be the experience of any game series. There are some entries that I absolutely adore, and some that I have very little interest in playing at all. And that brought me to make this video to discuss a particular topic that I've felt in my heart for many years, and is also something that Pokemon fans have debated about since time immemorial. As you've clicked on this video and you have noticed from the title and the intro, I'm going to be talking about the third generation of Pokemon, Ruby and Sapphire, and what I think is by far the very best of them all. Just to clarify that by generation I do mean the main 2 games, Ruby and Sapphire, paying particular attention to Pokemon Ruby, as Ruby is the first version that I played of Gen 3 and have played the most times by far since then. I won't be talking about Pokemon Emerald as I've only played through it once and it's quite a different experience from Ruby and Sapphire in terms of the story, so I won't really be referring to it. I did enjoy it, and it is included in Gen 3 of course, but just won't be able to go into as much detail about that story as I can about Ruby and Sapphire, so I'll just be talking about those 2. This video will be broken up into sections and time-stamped in the description, so that should you wish to go to a particular section at any other time, then you're more than welcome to do so. This video will be quite different from my Last of Us 2 video because that discussion felt like it suited the more connective way of discussing what went wrong with it, and this video will take separate aspects of what makes up the game and talk about why I love it and what they do to create that experience. The aspects of the game I'll be discussing are my history with the game's story, the characters, the region of Hoenn, the species, the music, remakes, and then round off the video with my overall thoughts. I've been working on this script for quite a while now, even before writing the Last of Us 2 video, so I'm so happy to finally be able to share it with you and hope that you enjoy it regardless of whether or not you agree with me. So without any further ado, let's head into the first section of this essay, and we start off with a bit of my personal history with the generation, just so that there's a bit of context as to why the games are so meaningful to me. When I was about 7 years old, I started seeing posters and adverts for the latest Pokemon generation at the time, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. I had loved the previous 2 generations of Pokemon already, and so I had an automatic interest in the next entry of the series. As the previous games had come out on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color systems, I had no way to play the next generation of Pokemon as we didn't yet have a Game Boy Advance in our family. That being the case, I decided to save all my pocket money until I was able to buy it for myself. I remember feeling real pride in saving up for weeks and months, and probably the best part of a year before one of the best Christmases I've ever had happened. There I was, an excited 8-year-old boy in our living room opening my presents, not expecting to unwrap one gift in particular, which turned out to not only be a Game Boy Advance, but a Game Boy Advance SP, which was brand new at the time, making me the envy of all 3 other people who played Pokemon in my school. It came with a copy of Super Mario Bros. 3 and Pokemon Ruby. I can't put into words quite how excited I was, suddenly having the thing I was saving up for so long, and on top of that having a load of money saved up which I'd never had the pleasure of. I wasn't sure if I had ever mentioned to my parents that I was buying to save Ruby in particular, but that was definitely the version I wanted all along, purely based on nothing but the legendary that was on the cover art for Ruby, my all-time favourite Pokemon Groudon, who I even have an awesome tattoo of. I played Pokemon Ruby so much that every time I beat the game I would restart it straight away and have that whole journey all over again, although never actually completing my Pokédex until a few years ago when I played the remake Omega Ruby. I would spend all of my school playtime sat on an old tractor tyre in the sun trading with my friends, having the occasional battle and just generally enjoying the bonding of us all playing the same game together, sharing our stories of the game and what secrets we had found. Ever since then it has been a game that I revisit every couple of years and always had the same magical experience I did all those years ago. This game, along with Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, are 2 of the games that most define my childhood in regards to gaming, and some of the fondest memories I have of growing up involve Pokemon Ruby. It really is one of the lifetime defining games for me, which I'm sure you all have your own similar feelings about certain games. And that's the basic story of my relationship with the game and why it's so meaningful to me. And that leads us into the first section of the video about the game itself, the story, which as I mentioned will be focusing on Pokemon Ruby. I might get quite descriptive in this section, and I should mention that because this is my favourite generation, there will of course be the factor of nostalgia playing a big part in my analysis of the game, but I will try and make and explain my points as objectively as I can. The story follows our protagonist moving into a new region called Hoenn after their father becomes the leader of the local gym. Now, a big part of the reason that I think the story is so great in Ruby and Sapphire is because it does the typical story beats that you come to expect in Pokemon games in a new and interesting way. For example, when we start the game, we're not just sat in our bedroom as we had been in the previous 2 games, but we arrive in Little Root Town stood quite dangerously in the back of a moving truck. We also meet the Professor in a new and surprising way to be given our first Pokemon. Not in his lab with the Pokeballs on the table like normal, but instead in the nearby Route 101 in which we choose a Pokemon to fight off a wild Poochyena. This is a far more interesting start to the game than had been done previously, and because it's so different, has been the most memorable start to a Pokemon game in my experience of the series. We then speak with Professor Birch, who is this generation's Pokemon researcher who sends us off on our journey to become a Pokemon trainer alongside our occasional rival Mayo Brendan, depending on which sex she chose to play as at the start of the game. Upon selecting our starter Pokemon from the choice of Torchic, Trico and Mudkip, we set off from Little Root Town with the initial quest of finding the town of Petalburg and to eventually meet our father in his gym. Here we have another unique moment that sets Gen 3 apart from the previous 2 games. We have the obligatory last talk with our mum before our big adventure, but instead of just saying that she'll save a portion of our money for us, she gives us a pair of running shoes, allowing for the player to navigate the world at much greater speed in pre-bicycle life. This makes the game so much more enjoyable to play as we're no longer just slowly waddling everywhere and we are introduced to a much faster form of transport just when we think that the walking speed we had been experiencing to that point is as fast as it gets. On our way to the gym we encounter another occasional rival in the form of Wally, one of the most pathetic yet endearing characters in the entire series. He desperately wants to catch his first Pokemon and attempts to get the help of our father Norman with catching one. Instead of helping him catch one, however, he gives Wally his Pokeballs and sends him with us to the nearby patch of grass to find a Pokemon. Again, this is where we get another great moment in the game. Instead of the usual tutorial where a professor or experienced trainer teaches the player how to catch Pokemon, instead we have Wally, who only has a vague idea as to what he's doing, blagging his way through catching a routes. This moment stands out as it not only teaches us how to catch Pokemon as the other games do, but does it in a comic and entertaining way, whilst also reinforcing to us what kind of character Wally is, which is something that will become important and have payoff as the game goes on. When we return to our dad at the gym with Wally, he congratulates us and says that he won't battle us as he will no doubt obliterate our Pokemon and to come back when we've proven to him our worth by beating the other gyms. Not long after this, we get our first introduction to the game's villainous team, or rather teams plural. For the first and only time in the Pokemon series, we are introduced to 2 different teams, Team Magma and Team Aqua, with one of these teams being shown as the villains and one as the heroes, depending on which version you're playing. I'll be referring to Magma throughout this video as I'm most used to playing Ruby, so Magma will become more naturally to me as being shown as the villains. I'll explore their motivations and goals later in the video, but for now I will just say that I find Magma and Aqua to be the most intriguing and conflicted villainous teams in the whole franchise. We find them hassling an old man in the woods for some important papers, and upon defeating the grunt they inform us that they have something much more valuable waiting in Rustboro City. We then meet the same man in Rustboro City who is having the Devon goods stolen from him. These parts are later revealed to be an important item in the main quest as they are used to enable submersible travel at great depths. We then enlist the help of a local sailor who is filled with rage as his precious Wingull has been stolen by the same gang that took the Devon goods. This Wingull is later revealed to be an ordinary Wingull with no special attributes except trying to escape the pursuits of the sailor. Once we have rescued the Wingull and reunited it with who we come to learn is Mr. Briny the sailor, we can then travel across the ocean to Dewford where we encounter Stephen and obtain the HM Flash before going on to Slateport City to confront Team Magma at the museum. The boat ride on the way to Slateport is one of the coolest moments in the entire game. It's a great moment of foreshadowing for later content as we sail past other trainers, dive spots, an abandoned ship, and items out in the open that can only be reached later in the game by surfing. It's also a quiet moment where the player can just look at the world with some beautiful music playing over it, taking in just how much there is yet to explore. Stephen's character acts throughout the game as an expert of sorts and helps to inform the player as to the greater role and plans of Team Magma through unmissable interactions with him in certain routes. This works well to fill us in on the story without needing to talk to an endless amount of grunts and civilians to understand what's going on, although there is still a little bit of that. That's something that I've found the Pokemon games doing more and more of in recent generations, having your rivals or other random characters coming up to you every few minutes and just talking and talking and talking, the most recent Pokemon Sword and Shield being one of the worst for this. Shortly after arriving in Slateport, we find Captain Stern at the Oceanic Museum being harassed by Team Magma, and after battling them, we meet the game's primary antagonist Maxie for the first time, who informs us of their plan to expand the world's overall landmass, citing that Pokemon and people all live on land and that more landmass is needed to sustain the population. Here we get our first insight into how Team Magma think. Although their intentions don't sound inherently evil, we are shown that they are definitely villains if there was any doubt, and that they have sinister intentions because of their penchant for threatening and robbing people. We also begin to understand the flaws in their plans. If they expand the landmass for people and Pokemon, that would mean less ocean for the many Pokemon species that live in oceans and rivers, not to mention all the people that love swimming. We immediately identify Team Magma as idealistic yet naive, and in the mind of the player you are given the motivation to chase after and stop them rather than just doing it because the game demands it. After sending the menacing team of very weak grunts running, we hand over the Devon goods to Stern, who simply says he needs to get off to work on the Ocean Floor Expedition project, and then we are left alone. I'm going to skip forward in the story a little bit here, as there's little special note in relation to the story besides an interaction with Wally and May. Wally wanting to challenge Moorville City's gym but not before challenging us again and losing, and May just wanting to see how strong we have grown since Littleroot. By now, the game's story has kept a relatively easy pace, giving the player ample opportunity to explore and level up enough before going too deep into the game, but still having the story beats consistent enough to make us want to keep progressing. From here on, we are familiar with both teams and continue on our path towards the Pokemon League while also trying to stop Magma. We soon then begin our climb of Mount Chimney, starting with us making our way up the mountain through a cave on Route 111, coming across a station on the way that offers cable car travel to the top of the mountain, which unfortunately isn't available to us until we've been to Meteor Falls. On our way there, we go through fields of long grass covered in volcanic ash, which we learn on our way through can be collected and then traded in for flutes that are used for various effects, such as healing status conditions and reducing wild Pokemon encounters. A similar mechanic that was used in Pokemon Silver and Gold, with the apricorns being turned into various Pokeballs. We arrive at Fall Arbor Town, in which we meet Lynette, who is the owner of the PC storage system, and can find another beauty contest as well as the house of Professor Cosmo. The player eventually reaches Meteor Falls, whereby we again meet Team Magma up to their usual geriatric harassment ethic that we've come to expect from them, stealing a precious meteorite from Professor Cosmo. Enter Team Aqua, the antithesis to Magma, simply stating that in this meeting they love the ocean above anything else and that Magma have proven dangerous in their past in their bid to expand the land, with Aqua's leader Archie informing us that he is dedicated to stopping Maxie at all costs. After we have saved Cosmo and explored Meteor Falls a bit more, we then have access to the cable car that takes us up to the summit of Mount Chimney. This is a moment that sticks with me, as I can still remember the first time that I used the cable car all those years ago and was amazed at how fantastic it was that you could quickly travel to the top of the mountain, whilst also having a nice little animation showing us the world around the mountain with a real sense of depth. Upon our arrival, we meet teams Magma and Aqua yet again, where both sides are engaged in various Pokemon battles on the summit. The player approaches Maxie and he reveals more details of Magma's plans, how they intend to use the meteorite to force Mount Chimney to erupt and for the lava to harden in order to create more landmass so that new species of Pokemon can evolve and humans can continue to advance. He then quickly insults you and battles you again. When you defeat Maxie, he generously gives you the plans he had for making the volcano erupt and swiftly flees the scene. We then head back down the mountain to Lava Ridge Town, where the player can obtain another gym badge and get the Go Goggles from Brendan or May, which allows us to safely explore the nearby desert, opening the path to even more Pokemon and one of the mysterious stone circles which I'll talk about later. This whole sequence from Full Lava to Lava Ridge is fantastic and easily one of the best sequences in the game. It shows us a whole new type of environment, gives us more Magma battles and looks incredible, as well as providing routes that are home to even more new species of Pokemon. This is just one of the many moments the game does brilliantly by turning the exploration into set pieces that help separate them from each other and clearly communicates to the player where they are. Even the less exciting routes in the game have things in them that make them easily identifiable. We are then told to go and finally challenge our father Norman at the gym in Petalburg. We go to the Petalburg gym and must navigate the gym's rooms by choosing which doors to go through until we encounter Norman. When we defeat him, he gives us the usual spiel about badge benefits and how we can now use Surf, but after telling us all that stuff he gets a little bit emotional, telling us how although as a leader he is upset he lost, he's also happy at the same time because his child is becoming not just a capable trainer, but one that can even surpass his abilities. His conflicting emotions tells us that he takes pride in us and our success just as seriously as he takes pride in his work, which could be a good or bad thing depending how you look at it. I really like this moment. It's really touching to see our father spur us on and believe in us as a trainer, which is made even more special given that we have never otherwise had a father figure appear in any of the other games. Soon after, we receive Surf from Wally's uncle and cross over towards Route 119. Surfing has also been vastly improved from the previous two generations. Lapras has been swapped for Wailmer as the surfing sprite, the exploration it opens up is far greater, and the travel speed is much faster, which given how expansive the ocean is in Ruby, it would have sucked if it was kept the same speed. This is another example of how the game uses the new technology to improve aspects of the game that we had been used to that were much less exciting, improving things like surfing, cycling and running. Something small, but something that nevertheless changed the series for the better in a big way. After disembarking on the other side of the water, we meet Steven again for the first time since Dewford, and he passive-aggressively asks us what sort of Pokemon raising tactics we employ. I don't really care for this encounter as it's completely meaningless and could have been used for much better effect, or even just to have a bit more in-depth conversation with Steven about what's happening. It does, however, mark the beginning of two of the best routes in the game, Routes 119 and Route 120, with a stop-off in Four Tree City. The reason I say that these are two of the best routes is because of a number of factors. Firstly, when you initially enter 119, you are greeted by a field of very tall grass and it starts to rain. Not necessarily that exciting sounding, but the very tall grass means that you're unable to zoom through it on your bike, and it's also nearly impossible to see other trainers until it's too late, meaning you are forced to navigate through it at a much slower pace, which increases a feeling of tension as to whether or not there will be a trainer lurking nearby. It does, however, use certain spots like loose items to help guide your way through the grass. The rain also affects combat, which makes the route that little bit more dynamic, as the rain will alter the strengths of certain Pokemon move types. It's also in this route we meet one of the weirdest and most unique Pokemon, Tropius, kind of a mix between a giraffe and a banana plant, which doesn't look in any way like a flying type, and yet for some reason it is, which always surprises me. These routes are full of surprises and secrets, including more places to set up secret bases, which we've been able to do for some time by this point, and another mysterious zone circle and invisible Pokemon. Further along Route 119 we come across the Weather Institute, a place where research is done on the region's weather patterns, again furthering the themes of environment in the game and the region's devotion to it. We soon learn that Magma has stormed the facility in order to steal a Pokemon that is believed to have been created at the lab which has the power to affect the weather, another thing that would surely meet the nefarious desires of Team Magma. After defeating them, the scientists thank us and do so by handing over the artificial Pokemon to us, which is lucky for them that we aren't a Magma spy pretending to beat Magma so that we can get the Pokemon by just being given it as a reward. The player then continues to Fortree City, but for some reason the entrance to the gym is blocked. This took me so long to figure out what to do when I first played the game. Initially I thought, oh god, is this a glitch? Instead, it turns out to be an invisible Pokemon known as Kecleon, which we can confront with help from our friend Steven. This is a really cool feature in the game and helps flesh out the abilities of Pokemon by implementing them in a realistic way in the environment, but I do wish they made more use of this in the game. I think you encounter invisible Kecleons 4 or 5 times in Route 120 and then never have it happen to you again, which is a real shame. There are other moments where they utilise Pokemon to show their usefulness, however. For instance, at the very beginning of the game we see some Machokes helping you move into your new home by moving furniture and boxes around. Eventually we arrive in Lily Cove City, a really beautiful seaside town that has a lot to see and do, including a museum that the player can help curate paintings for, a Mega Mart where you can play the lottery, another Pokemon beauty contest, and the Move Deleter. Whilst in Lily Cove we see some more Magma Grunts who talk about their ambitions in Team Magma and inform us of Maxie going to Mount Pyre, a mountain that contains the game's Pokemon Cemetery as well as the holding place of the powerful red and blue orbs. These orbs hold the forces that can either calm or enrage the ancient legendary Pokemon of Land and Sea, Groudon and Kyogre. The Guardians of the Orbs greet us upon reaching the summit, and we are told that Maxie has already been and gone, taking with him the blue orb. We are then handed the red orb as we are told they should never be separated and told to catch up with Maxie as soon as possible. It's never really detailed where the orbs originated, but we can assume they contain some form of essence of these two Pokemon, as in the remake games Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire the orbs act as holdable items that turn Groudon and Kyogre into their primal forms during battle, as well as of course being able to awaken them both in the original and remake games. What Maxie doesn't realise at this point is that he is in possession of the wrong orb for controlling Groudon, which the player is made aware that should he use it to awaken Groudon, nothing but chaos will erupt, quite literally. We are then tasked with going to Slateport, which luckily by this point is a nice easy trip as we received the HM Fly from our rival and so we can get there within seconds. This is where those Devon goods we rescued earlier come back into the game. Team Magma enter as we are talking to Captain Stern about a hidden underwater cavern and begin strong-arming Captain Stern in order to steal his research submarine. We are then luckily told their plans as they rush off to their secret hideout in Lily Cove. We head back over to Lily Cove where we can finally gain entrance to Magma's headquarters. As is traditional in Pokemon games, the enemy base is a labyrinth of pathways that can take you straight back to the start if you make even one mistake in getting through the compound, by walking onto the wrong teleporter pad. During the player's quest through the base, the Master Ball can also be obtained in anticipation for the player's desire to catch the legendary Pokemon Groudon when we finally meet it. When we eventually reach the end of the maze, Magma's admin Tabitha confronts us in order to stall time so the Maxie and the submarine that I mentioned can escape ready to scour the seafloor for Groudon's lair. Now, if I were an admin for a villainous team, I'm not sure I would let slip the intentions of my boss to any old person who comes along. But luckily for us though, Tabitha does just that and tells us that Maxie has scarpered off to the underwater cave. At this moment the player may be thinking, Jesus, how the hell am I supposed to go underwater? I can surf, but that's about it as far as water is concerned. Thankfully, with just a quick journey to Moss Deep, we can obtain the HM Dive from Steven, who also tells us about his embarrassingly empty house. After a bit of exploring Moss Deep, the player's next move will be naturally to surf further down the map using a newly found power to dive in the process. I've never once found it difficult to navigate around Hoenn. The way to go is either well indicated by clear and obvious paths, or objectives further away specifically told to you by key characters, which although is still done throughout the franchise, I so often find myself skipping through conversations in recent generations as they are so long that I end up completely missing where I'm meant to go. Either that or the locations are so big that exploring and navigating them becomes a chore, but again that's something I'll get to later. Once we have gotten into the open ocean and found an appropriate spot in which to dive, we then do so, and what greets us is one of the best pieces of music in the entire game and indeed the series. Instead of explaining why the dive theme is so amazing, I'll simply let it play for you to see for yourself and to give you a little bit of a break from my voice. This theme really makes you feel like you're at the bottom of the ocean, and of all the underwater game themes out there, this is by far one of the best, and the introduction of dive is one of the best examples of the Pokemon games advancing and evolving. It literally opens up a whole new world for us to explore, allowing us to find new Pokemon, coloured shards and other useful items, and secrets that we had never before seen or discovered. The way the game presents this to the player is clearly a part of the game they put a lot of love into. The scenery, the animations, the music all come together to create a real sense of being in another world, and that there is even more to explore than you first thought. I was in total awe of this the first time I used dive, as I was not in any way expecting what dive would be able to offer, even though it is foreshadowed throughout the game in certain areas like the sailor in Slateport, the guy outside Briney's house and Captain Stern, explaining the importance of the underwater cavern. After a bit of exploration, finding shards and new Pokemon on the way, the player eventually makes their way to a suspicious looking cave along the seabed. When we make our way inside, we find Team Magma's stolen sub and then able to use dive to get into the cave proper. We then fight our way through various magma grunts and get into the chamber in which we finally meet the legendary Pokemon Groudon deep in slumber, or indeed Kyogre if you're playing Sapphire. Coming across Groudon sat in the cave is a truly awesome moment. All you see is this big menacing silhouette, and as we approach it's obvious just how intimidating this Pokemon is. Then enters Maxie, who challenges us again for the final time. After the battle, Maxie does some more chest pounding and uses the blue orb to awaken Groudon, which with a collection of fainted Pokemon probably isn't the best idea. The room turns a vibrant blue and Groudon moves closer to us, which at this point makes us think, oh yeah, finally I get to catch it, but then he vanishes. The stakes rise substantially at this point as we are told Groudon is out of control and the world outside has become so hot that it poses a threat to the whole planet, with even the seas drying up in the intense heat. This is made explicit to us when we venture outside with Maxie and Archie, who turns up just as the calamity is beginning, and see that the screen is flashing with a bright strobing effect indicating the sun's intensity. The teams flee the scene and Steven arrives to tell us to go to Sutopolis, the source of the sudden burst of heat. This is my favourite sequence in the entire game. It heightens the threat considerably by simply showing Groudon, making us aware that we are approaching the end of the story. But rather than just confront and beat Groudon, it vanishes and we are initially unsure of where the hell to go next or where to find it, extending the climax of the game. This is in addition to the devastating heat of the world outside the cave makes us want to chase down Groudon straight away, if not just so that we can at least catch it. It also does well to show us the power of Groudon and Kyogre, as they have the potential to destroy all life on Earth by simply being awake. The game does a really good job of showing to us that there are real world consequences to what's happening, not just an effect. This also marks the turning point of Maxie's convictions. We see what kind of devastation awaits if his plan is successful, so he reflects on the situation and is genuinely regretful as to what he has done. He even goes back to Mount Pyre and returns the stolen orb to its rightful place. This is such an interesting moment in the story that is actually missable if you choose not to ever go back to Mount Pyre. The whole way through the game we've been firmly against Max's choices and beliefs, which is still the right stance to take, but the game commits to Maxie himself turning against those choices and realises how naive he was in his endeavours. He understands that his goals were misguided and dangerous, jeopardising the entire planet when all it needs is balance, and not the complete transformation of it that he's been chasing for the whole game. This of course isn't unique to Maxie, Archie does the same in Sapphire, but the point is that these characters admit to being wrong, and that's a really important lesson to include in a game that is primarily marketed to children. When we finally get to Sutopolis, we meet up with our friend Stephen and the local gym leader Wallace, who acts as the guardian of the Cave of Origin. They inform us that the power source causing the weather is emanating from within the cave. They realise that we possess the red orb and so throw us into the lion's den to deal with the situation. On our way through the cave we find the HM waterfall and begin to see clumps of rubies embedded in the walls, finally tying the game to its title. I don't think the game quite makes finding Groudon in the Cave of Origin as impactful as it could, given that we have already met him back in the underwater cavern, and so a lot of the effect is lost, which the coming battle makes up for, as that is what the player has been working towards the entire game. It's rare for me to ever use a Master Ball for anything, seeing as we have the option to save the game and try again, but there is one Pokemon worth using it on which we'll come to later as well. When Groudon is either captured or defeated, we can then go back outside and find the world back to normal, and also hopefully ourselves in possession of an ancient Pokemon capable of destroying the entire planet. So it's just as well that we have the red orb to control them. Outside the cave we meet Stephen for the final time before the Pokemon League, and he passes on Wallace's thanks for stopping Groudon. This then basically marks the end of the game's story, but although the main story is over, the game is far from finished, as there's still the Elite Four to challenge, secrets to find, a Pokedex to complete, legendary Pokemon to catch, and if you're a hunter, shiny Pokemon to grind for. So that's the end of the story section, which is by far the longest section of this video. I hope I've managed to get across well enough what the story does so well and why it's the best in the series in my opinion, and why the uniqueness of it is basically what turns it into such a great story. Next I'll talk about the characters, which isn't that long a section but still has some interesting points to talk about. The very first character we meet, as is traditional in Pokemon games by this point, is your mum. She gives you a brief explanation about you having moved to your new home and that you will get your own room, the only room besides the kitchen and the dining room I might add, and tells you to set the clock in your room. After this you go downstairs and it's revealed that contrary to the previous generations, your character has a father around and that your mum isn't a single parent. Although the two of them are not physically together until after the credits of the game, it's unique to Ruby and Sapphire to have a father figure of the protagonist appear at all. While the other games have a nice focus on single motherhood, it's still a cool thing to see that you have both a mother and a father present, and it's another feature in the game that makes the generations stand out as being unique. Not only is Norman the only father of any of the protagonists to make an appearance, but he is simultaneously a gym leader in the game, which is more important than it may sound, as that's the whole reason why you moved to Littleroot in the first place, as well as meaning that we are at some point going to have to go head to head with our own father. It's a really subtle moment of emotional weight, but it works to the benefit of the game. It's nice to see a family that all exists as one unit, and it would have been easy to make Norman a very tough love type of father who doesn't acknowledge your achievements, but instead he's a very supportive father and drives the player with his confidence in you. This is clear when we defeat him and he says that he's both happy and sad at the same time. Sad that he lost, but happy that you won. The conflicting feelings he has about the battle makes us believe in him whilst also feeling pride in ourselves for having been able to overcome him, especially after experiencing how strong his sloth Pokemon are. Not only is Norman our father and gym leader in the game, but he is a close personal friend to Professor Birch. Birch is this generation's professor and ultimately plays a somewhat limited role in the story, sending us on our journey after giving us our Pokemon, and then not having another forced encounter with him again until the end of the Pokemon League. As I mentioned earlier, we first meet him being chased by a Poochyena outside of Littleroot town before we come to the rescue, and as a thank you for helping him, the professor gifts us with our very own Pokemon. I love this moment because it's such a simple, unique and exciting introduction to battling, choosing your starter, and it acts as a mini set piece for meeting Birch for the first time. There's not much else to say about Birch as we only have a couple of forced encounters with him, but like Norman, his kid, as he refers to them, is the subject of great pride to him. The sex of his child, who is also your rival, is dependent on which sex you choose to play as the start of the game. May if you're male and Brendan if you're female. The main thing to say about the rivals in Ruby is that they're not really rivals as such. They're rivals in the same sort of way that Sonic and Knuckles are rivals. They're friends but have a sort of competing relationship. Overall they're supportive of you but want to succeed on their own. Although I like the characters of May and Brendan and love having little interactions with them to help break up the exploration and story beats, I also dreaded them as a child because I got defeated by them a lot. This isn't a fault with the difficulty curve I should say, or because the rivals are OP, but because as a young child I didn't yet have as much an understanding of type strengths and weaknesses as I do now. In fact, I would go out of my way to avoid as many trainers as humanly possible, meaning I was a good few levels below them whenever I encountered them in my travels. By the time we get out of Lily Cove, we have challenged our rival 4 times, with Lily Cove being the final occasion we battle them. They then simply say they're going back to Littleroot and focus on their Pokedex. Once we have defeated Stephen in the Elite Four, our rival then arrives with Birch to congratulate us on our victory, and they say that they knew we would always become the champion. Then in the credits, as our character is cycling along the grass on their way home, there is a lovely moment where our rival races past us on their bike. The player's character then pushes forward and catches up to them, cycling side by side, before both riding off together as best friends. One of the characters I've talked about but not really focused on as much so far is Wally. Wally is one of my favourite characters in all of the Pokemon games. I can't help but feel sorry for Wally. Throughout the course of the game he's a timid, weak, aspirational young trainer, but in comparison to May and Brendan, facing Wally is a breeze, emphasising just how weak he is when we meet him, but at the same time making you feel bad for beating him. Wally is very unique. He isn't a self-confident pain in the ass or a difficult elite trainer who you dread to face whenever you see him. He's shy and lacks confidence, always looking for the permission of others to do anything. So many times in these games have I wanted to be able to give back my winnings or to just give him a reassuring hug because I felt so guilty about winning. It's made all the worse when you realise that he has some sort of illness that in certain climates inhibits him. In many ways he is a deeply inept and incapable character through no fault of his own, yet despite this he is a determined, motivated and aspirational. He is one of the most well-written, fully rounded and sympathetic characters in the entire series, and in some ways I wish he was the sole rival to the player who overcame everything to become a really tough final battle before the Pokemon League. I find every interaction with Wally a real joy to play, seeing him progress through the game, but bless him, he is always ever so slightly weaker than us throughout the entire course of the game. So although he is never really a challenge, we feel bad for him because he genuinely tries his hardest. In fact, in our final confrontation with him he says he couldn't have made it this far without us. That beating him made him stronger, and in fairness he puts up a good fight at the end with an Altaria and his fully evolved routes. This is exactly the kind of character Wally is, not weak or useless, but resilient. As we encounter our rival and Wally throughout the game, we also continue to encounter Steven a few times. Although pretty obvious when it's revealed that Steven is the Hoenn Pokemon champion, I never guessed at the age of 8 in my first playthrough that Steven would end up being our ultimate challenge when we get to the final battle of the Elite Four. In fact, I originally thought that Mr. Stone would be more important to the main story than Steven, which seems ridiculous now because we never get to meet Stone again after receiving the Pokénav. Of course, this isn't the case and we continue to meet Steven throughout the game in various different routes. It's even foreshadowed on Route 111 when we battle a family who all live in this house and each make reference to how strong their relative is, stating that he's well on the way to becoming the champion. When we do finally face off against Steven, all of our interactions with him previously in the game culminate to a more intense and rewarding battle at the end. We know he is a powerful and experienced trainer from what his family has told us, but we never really get to understand this until we face him. I do wish we could have had more frequent encounters with Steven, that the ones we do have with him are more meaningful, but as an additional character he's okay, but basically acts as a foreshadowing for the Elite Four. Whenever I play through Ruby I feel a real sense of pride for having made it to the waterfall that stands as a gate to Evergrande City. However, this is not the end of the road before the Elite Four. First the player must navigate through Victory Road, which personally I think is the most frustrating part of the game as it breaks apart that feeling of just wanting to walk up to the Pokemon League. I don't hate it, but it's just another thing that you have to do before getting there, only really having the benefit of being able to catch some last minute strong Pokemon. Once at the door of the Pokemon League you can finally feel like you've made it. Before you stands the final test to prove that you really are the best trainer in the region and can take your place as its champion. But of course it's the Elite Four, you're just some trainer off the street, or at least you would be if you weren't in the possession of a legendary Pokemon at this point. The player then makes their way through the Elite Four, although if you're like me you would brute force your way through with revives and max potions. Just like the gym leaders, the Elite Four specialise in different types, those being Dark, Ghost, Ice, Dragon and Steel. Upon completing the league you're then inducted to the Hall of Fame, whereby your rival and Professor Birch come to congratulate you. What's funny about this moment is that May or Brendan, your rival, has been ahead of you the entire time, comes in to offer advice for beating Steven, not realising that they are now too late. Professor Birch is aware of your win and to congratulate you berates you for not having a totally complete Pokédex. Steven then takes you to the back room and puts your Pokemon on the table, then your Pokemon's images are displayed on the screen. I never get tired of going through the Elite Four and evolving my remaining Pokemon. Even when I know they can't beat me, I still find it fun interacting with these characters and watching level 2 Pokemon shoot up to level 25 with one Pokemon defeat using the experience share. One of the problems I used to have with the league, however, is that you become the champion but after the credits roll you're back to square one. A problem that I was overjoyed to see they fixed in Omega Ruby, whereby you remain the champion and can challenge a random trainer at the end of the league, which is something I'd been wishing that was possible since I started playing Pokemon, and to see that implemented in Omega Ruby was amazing and unexpected. I think that Game Freak did an amazing job of creating a story in which we're not just against Team Rocket again, but we have two new teams with clashing ideologies battling it out to create a world that is wholly different from the one we're experiencing. This is the first and only time in the series that this is the case, and for me is one of the many reasons that makes Ruby and Sapphire so special. It's a gang war that at the centre of it has themes of environmentalism but uses political and social beliefs to give the teams motivation to do what they do, thinking that they are doing it for the betterment of the world in general. The teams in essence are not really traditional villains in the Pokemon world. They don't want to steal, exploit, harm or distress Pokemon for money or fame. They want to literally change the world in order to help humans and Pokemon, even if they don't see or understand the destructive consequences of their goals, although we do later know that they regret their actions. Although I've always played Ruby over Sapphire, whenever I do play Sapphire I get this weird sensation when I'm so used to Team Aqua being the good guys that for them to suddenly turn into the villains feels really unnatural. This is because in Sapphire the teams are reversed. Aqua become the bad guys who want to expand the oceans instead of the land, and Magma are the ones trying to stop their dastardly plans. This actually works to the game's benefit as you have two different versions of the game, and because there are two different teams you have two different points of view. The people who played Sapphire thinking that Aqua are the bad guys wanted to expand the oceans for Pokemon to thrive, and people like me playing Ruby understanding Magma to be the villains wanting to expand the land for humans to advance. It's a brilliant way of establishing differences between the versions, and I really wish more of the games would explore this in a similar way. This underpins the generation's focus on perspective, not just in the sense of the two teams who appear either villainous or friendly depending on which version you play, but also in the terms of the two teams' perspective on what's right. Earlier I said that it's a great message to send to the game's intended audience. It's such a rare moment for a piece of media giving healthy messages to children, but Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire does just this. It teaches two main lessons in these characters that just make the game even more fantastic. It's made explicit that Team Magma has good intentions even if the means are a bit extreme. In their heads it's a totally noble endeavour and are so blinded that they can't possibly see the negatives. So on the one hand it's showing us that it's very easy to have good intentions and do bad things. In fact, we've all probably done something that fits that description on more than one occasion. The second lesson is given to us mostly when we leave the underwater cavern with Maxie after Groudon is awoken, but more effectively when we meet him atop Mount Pyre. Maxie admits to us and himself that he was wrong, and is truly sorrowful as to what he's done. You're probably thinking this is going too much into something that's just a brief moment that just serves to make the story turn back to normal. And that's true, but why not give this lovely moment of redemption for the characters whilst also trying to teach something to young people at the same time? I also quickly want to talk about the gyms in this generation, as they have their own character in terms of their leaders and the actual gyms themselves. There are 8 gyms in this game with 9 gym leaders, with one of the gyms consisting of twins acting as that gym's leader, which utilises the system of double battles. The gym leaders in order are as follows: Roxanne, the rock type specialist; Brawly, who utilises fighting type Pokemon; Watson, the master of electric type Pokemon; Flannery, the fire type leader; our father Norman, specialising in normal Pokemon; Winona, using flying type Pokemon; Tate and Lisa, psychic twins, are unsurprisingly psychic type leaders; and Wallace, who specialises in water type. These gyms act as they normally do, with each gym specialising in a particular Pokemon type such as fire, ground, electric, etc. And once the player has beaten the leaders, they get the gym's respective badge. This then allows the player to effectively use Pokemon up to a certain level without issue, and allows the use of HMs that the player collects through the game, which are essential for progressing past certain areas. Nothing too revolutionary here, but I have to say I love the gyms in Hoenn. All of the leaders are interesting with their own personalities, even having names that reflect the Pokemon types they use, such as Watson for electric type Pokemon and Norman for normal type Pokemon. Many of them also use unique puzzles to get through, which are sometimes pretty tough, and with one of the gym leaders being the player's father, it makes us more invested to get through the gym so that we can face him. Gym puzzles were of course present in the previous games, but Ruby goes one step further and adds what I would consider an unofficial gym in the form of the Trick House, with the Trick Master being its leader. Each room of the Trick House has a particular puzzle to overcome, sometimes using similar setups to the actual gyms, gradually getting harder with each room in which you battle trainers in order to get to the end of the room, then being rewarded with a useful or rare item after each successful completion. Unlike the actual gym leaders, once you have completed all the house's tricks, the Trick Master disappears and leaves behind a note to not go looking for him. I always wish that it would be possible to find him somewhere around Hoenn if you looked hard enough as a final challenge by the Trick Master, maybe disguised as a tree or something, but unfortunately you can't, and Game Freak missed a trick. Something that I know that Emerald does do better is allow the player to rebattle gym leaders, making the game much more replayable, especially when training up Pokemon with the experience share without having to go all the way through the Elite Four. You can, however, in Ruby and Sapphire have rematches with people you have already beaten through the Pokénav. The Pokénav also allows us to track where we are going thanks to its inbuilt map, allowing us to better navigate the beautiful world of Hoenn, which funnily enough leads us into the next section of the video where I'll talk about the stunning region. Hoenn is a beautiful region based on the island of Kyushu in Japan and the absolute star of the show. One minute you'll be walking through a blistering desert and the next you'll be halfway up an active volcano, leaving your footprints in the ash as you go. Consisting of many different types of geological locales, from forest to beaches, volcanoes to underwater caves and many more, which all blend seamlessly together, Hoenn is a region that has everything you expect from a Pokemon game in terms of gameplay and exploration, but expands and evolves in ways that for the time these games came out was simply staggering. It's this variety that makes Hoenn stand out so much to me, being tropical and beautiful yet at times treacherous, with the desert in particular posing a threat to your party in battle during sandstorms. One of the biggest joys to have in Hoenn is by exploring its secrets, of which there are many. There are some areas that can only be reached by having certain equipment or abilities, like needing go goggles to protect your eyes to get into the desert, choosing between 2 different types of bicycle in order to traverse different types of landscapes such as precarious ledges and landslides, and utilising HMs to fly, surf, smash and dive into areas you previously couldn't reach. This makes progressing the story feel immensely satisfying, as it continues to encourage exploration the more you do it. I remember my first time playing the game and coming across this abandoned ship on the way to Slateport and thinking, wow, I want to go there right now, which meant that I was excited for the moment where I could get surf and then go and explore what the ship had to offer as soon as possible. I've never had that feeling with any of the other Pokemon games. They did, however, make moments like this even more rewarding in the remakes, as there are extra added secrets in this ship on top of what there already was. Sometimes even when you uncover secrets in a world, it's not entirely obvious how to access its benefits. The amount of times I beat the game and came across this message on a wall of an underwater cave before realising I could go to the surface and create access to more legendary Pokemon is astounding. My 8-year-old brain just didn't click that the pattern was actually written in Braille instead of some random made-up language, so I had no inclination to try and figure out what to do. This was made especially exciting as I encountered these mysterious stone circles throughout the game and in my head knew that there must be something that connects them but had no idea what, which is even backed up by a hiker looking for ancient nearby ruins. I think I even one time kidded myself that they were just reusing assets and that the stone circles were meaningless, but they weren't. I was right all along. It just takes a bit of exploration and research to gain access to what the game hides from you. But even when you do solve the initial puzzle with the Braille, all the game tells you is there was a distant noise and that you as the player need to figure out what it was. A similar thing happens on the same route as that cave, in which you can come across a huge tower if you take the correct path of currents using surf. And the only way to reach the top of the tower is by having the Mac bike with you. When you gain entrance to the tower, you must then use the bike to ride across the broken floor tiles, with failure leading to you dropping down to the floor below it. Although I understood how to get to the top of this area, I still had no idea what was waiting for me when I got there. But when I did reach what was waiting up there, the first time I encountered it, I was taken aback as we then meet another one of the coolest Pokemon in the entire series, Rayquaza, although this can only be encountered by beating the Elite Four. These are the kind of moments that Ruby and Sapphire do so well, making your exploration pay off in ways you don't even necessarily expect. The only part of the game I have never explored is the fabled Mirage Island. If you go to Pacific Log Town, an old man will tell you a story about a mystical island called Mirage Island. If you're lucky enough to have Mirage Island spawn, you can then receive a berry that's only found on the island that can be used to make gold Pokeblocks, and you can encounter Wynaut, which can then only be found here and by hatching an egg given to us at the Hot Spring and Lava Ridge. However, the likeliness of having Mirage Island spawn is extremely low, as the game generates a random number each day, and in order for the island to appear you must have a Pokemon in your party whose first two personality buys matches this number. I have never seen for myself or known anyone who has ever encountered the island in these original games, so if you've seen it then let me know in the comments and tell me whether it was worth the hunt. There are probably dozens of notable moments where exploration is rewarded, but if you haven't played these games before and are interested to play for the first time, then it's better to just play them and find these secrets yourself. And yes, I know I just gave away a few of the secrets, but hey, this is an essay analysing the game after all. Aside from the main story, collecting badges and filling the decks, there's plenty of extra side content that you can naturally come across throughout the game to help fill out the routes and cities. These include exploring hidden and secret areas, gambling at the casino in Moorville, completing the trick house levels, making bases, taking part in TV interviews, going on safari, breeding Pokemon, collecting volcanic ash, doing beauty contests, fishing, finding fossils, visiting a hot spring, and much more. Now of course some of these are also available in other generations, but implementing previous features like safari and breeding, as well as new features like building bases and extra traversal modes, made this a very special experience for me as a child, and was a real turning point in what was possible with Pokemon games. The only time I felt a surprising step up from this was in Omega Ruby, where you can fly above Hoenn with Latios or Latias and find even more secrets such as wormholes with legendaries in them and islands that hide species that can only be accessed this way. One of the other new features in Ruby is the ability to grow, harvest and blend berries, with the minigame determining what sort of Pokeblocks can be made using the berries in your bag. These blocks can then be used to up the beauty stats of your Pokemon, which becomes very useful when submitting them into a contest. Now I've got to be honest, I only ever did these contests because I love seeing the hearts light up above people's heads when my Pokemon did something cool or cute. I rarely won any ribbons, especially the higher level ribbons for contests, and so never got my Pokemon painted by the museum creator like one of his French girls. One of the most fun aspects of this is blending the berries. This can be done in any of the beauty halls and is essentially a rhythm-based minigame where the player must press the A button at the moment that the berry blender's pointer is facing the player's button. If done properly, you can get a bonus to your Pokeblocks, which is indicated by 2 concentric circles. With enough practice, this can become a very rewarding minigame, allowing you to create some great Pokeblocks, which then seriously boosts your Pokemon stats. Hoenn is also famous for being the region in which we are first introduced to double battles, a system whereby the player can send out 2 Pokemon onto the battlefield but has to challenge 2 other Pokemon sent out by double X you meet on your journey. At first I wasn't sure whether I liked this feature, thinking it would just be a gimmick, but actually I ended up loving double battles. Double battles bring a new dynamic to battling that can create a higher feeling of anticipation during a battle and make you consider your tactics a bit more as to which of your Pokemon should target which enemy Pokemon. And they're not just used as one-off moments in the game, there are quite a lot of double battles around Hoenn, my favourite being Gabby and Ty, who are a news crew that you meet several times throughout your journey and even get to give interviews to, which are then even broadcast on TVs around the region. As I stated earlier, one of the gyms utilises this advance by giving his twin sisters as its leader, once again giving us a unique experience from what we had experienced before. Double battles can also be played against a friend via Game Link on the top floor of Poke Centres, as well as being the place to go to do trades for version exclusive Pokemon. It's clear then that this generation is one that evolves the series in a number of ways. This includes the game's update of animations. Although by today's standards and successive games in the series getting better, this is not necessarily anything special, but at the time they changed the series in a substantial way. From the way your character's hair waves around as you run, to attacks having fluid motions during battles that shows you what's happening, to the environmental animations that help fill out the world and make it look beautiful and believable. They even went through the trouble of making your character be reflected in calm waters and puddles. All of these things allow the game to realise its world of Hoenn, as well as giving players a more advanced experience than had been done previously, which you would come to expect of a console called the Game Boy Advance. This is used in many ways, but one of the most important in terms of gameplay and its influence in the environment is in the cycling. The game allows you to use two different types of bikes in this generation, the Mach bike and the Acro bike. The Mach bike only really has one ability, which is to go much faster than a normal bike, which is great in itself as it allows the player to cycle up steep slippery hills and to ride over broken floor tiles before they collapse. The more exciting bike option, however, is the Acro bike, which has several functions. Firstly, it works as a normal bike, allowing you to travel quickly. It can also be used to jump over gaps on narrow ledges, and when cycling around as normal, holding the B button will make the player do a wheelie, which doesn't really have any practical aspect, but it's a really cool feature of the game and one that has been used in subsequent generations. This is a prime example of Game Freak trying something new and different and succeeding, perfectly integrating an already well-loved part of the game by getting your bike and using it around the world, beyond just simply using it to get around faster. I remember as a child playing Pokemon Silver and on several occasions saying to my friends in school, wouldn't it be cool if you could do tricks on your bike? Expecting nothing more than just a stylistic difference, and yet when Ruby and Sapphire came around, not only could you do various tricks, but it also has a purpose as well. Again, this all feeds back into the biggest joy of these games, exploration. Also scattered throughout Hoenn are a wide range of towns and cities that for the most part each has their own unique character and look that separates them from each other. Ones that stand out specifically are Lava Ridge Town that is on the side of an active volcano, complete with its own hot spring and space where you can bury yourself in the sand. There is also Four Tree City that is basically a network of tree houses with a gym and surrounded by invisible Kecleons. Sutopolis located inside of a dormant volcano, which also happens to be the city in which we encounter Groudon. And Pacificlog, which is similar to Fortree in the sense that it's all connected by wooden supports, but lies on the surface of the ocean. Each town and city also has its own character in the way its residents talks to you and the way they live. One of the best examples of this is in Dewford Town, in which the residents are separated from the mainland but are not up to date on current trends. If you speak to this guy on the beach, you can tell him what is currently hip and trendy elsewhere in the world. I told him that I am man, and so he takes that as being the coolest thing he's ever heard. You can make any combination of nonsensical text and that is what becomes cool. Then if you enter the building next to him before he has even had a chance to go in, and only seconds after we have spoken to him, the entire building is discussing I am man, selling I am man merchandise and just generally falling over themselves about I am man. Not all of the towns feature moments like this specifically, but they do each have their own population and has something to say about the town they live in. I've always loved the uniqueness of the settlements in Ruby and Sapphire, particularly how they match the idea of nature being the overriding theme of the game and place these towns in naturally occurring geological sites. Although not all of them are like this and some are closer to the more traditional towns and cities we expect from Pokemon, these games are the only ones that really play around with the idea of towns being built around nature. Pokemon to me has always been a series about nature and the love of nature, yet in recent games with the exception of Sun and Moon, the cities and towns seem to have become bigger and bigger to the point where they dwarf the natural areas surrounding them. It's only when Sun and Moon came around that I finally found a Pokemon version that could rival Ruby and Sapphire in its beauty, setting and overall game design. But Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire has always been the generation that embodies the concept of nature and the love of nature above all others. The previous games were limited by what they could program with a more restrictive technology, and so the towns and cities are just groups of buildings, and I can't criticise them too much for that. But what I'm going to do now is show you the towns and cities from Ruby and Sapphire and compare them with the towns and cities from later games, paying specific attention to some of the monstrosities that have been in recent generations. One of the worst offenders of this is Lumio City in X and Y. I mean, look at this, there is so much going on and is so far away from what I consider to be a Pokemon game city that I felt that when I was playing it that I was actually not playing Pokemon at all. If you're playing a Pokemon game exploring a city and need to have taxis available to help you get around the city, then something is seriously wrong there. Although with the amount of times I got lost, they ended up being used more than I would care to admit, otherwise I never would have found where I wanted to go. To sum up, Hoenn is colourful, beautiful, full of secrets to explore, has an immense number of things to see and do, offers brand new experiences, and evolves previously beloved experiences for the better. All of these culminating in a region that keeps pulling me back again and again, and surely will do for many years to come. It wouldn't be any sort of comprehensive video essay without discussing the Pokemon species in this generation. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire has 200 different species of Pokemon in the Hoenn Dex, excluding Jirachi and Deoxys, with those being given away through special distribution events. With the introduction of the new generation, a new roster of species had to come with it. New Pokemon species are instrumental in selling a new Pokemon game, with Ruby and Sapphire's new species being my personal highlight in terms of overall Dex entries of any game. Of course, we have the usual favourites such as Pikachu, Tentacool, Geodude and many others making an appearance. But we also have a huge selection of new ones. Regions and Pokemon should always be as closely reflected in each other as possible to make the game feel believable. All the species in Ruby and Sapphire look and feel as if they belong in a geologically varied region, showcasing Pokemon that live in woods, the sea, active volcanoes and rough deserts. And with 135 unique Pokédex entries, it's one of the largest sets of new Pokemon in the entire series. Arguably the most important aspect of new Pokemon species in new games are the 3 starter Pokemon. As always, we get the choice of 3 Pokemon types, Torchic being the fire type, Mudkip the water type, and Trico the grass type. Although these games are my favourite starter is actually Totodile from the previous generation, and its final evolution for Alligator is one of my favourite Pokemon of all the generations. Despite that, the starters here are also very good. They all look great, have awesome movesets, and their evolutions are badass while still being believable in the context of being living creatures. They can also provide a good challenge when you encounter your rival throughout the game who chooses whatever the super effective type against yours is. As I mentioned near the beginning of this video, another one of the factors that is key to marketing the games and building excitement for them is the legendaries. Take Groudon for example. He's huge, red and black, covered in enormous spikes, has gigantic claws, and an expression on his face that intimidates the player with his demeanour. This is made even more apparent in his primal form, which I'll talk a bit more about later in the video. When the legendary Pokemon is what's printed on the box and is directly part of the marketing for the game, it's important for Game Freak to make them stand out and be desirable, which I would argue there is no better example than Groudon. He has always grabbed my attention as a Pokemon, as he has just everything that I love as part of its design. Black and red are my 2 favourite colours, it's covered in spikes which are always cool, and although it's a ground type can do some awesome things with fire, there is just nothing about it that I don't like. I'm not as much of a fan of Kyogre purely because I've always played Ruby and so I've been more exposed to Groudon than I have Kyogre, but I still do love its design. It does however help to further reinforce the way the 2 games are diametrically opposed to each other. Groudon is fierce and scary looking, but Kyogre, although still intimidating, has much more of a calm and elegant look to it. On top of these 2 you have a 3rd main legendary in the form of Rayquaza, which continues this trend as being a Pokemon that invokes awe when you encounter it. As I said in the Hoenn section of the video, the moment I stumbled across this Pokemon was one of the most exciting moments I've had in any video game full stop. It not only rewards your exploration but makes for an intense encounter as you don't know what to expect from it the first time and don't want it to faint before catching it and losing the chance to catch it at all. Rayquaza and indeed all the legendaries share the theme of existing in locations that reflect their type. If Groudon is the Earth Pokemon and Kyogre is the Ocean Pokemon, Rayquaza being at the top of the tower reflects it being the Air Pokemon, which again is reflected in its design. This theme continues with the 3 Regis. Once the player has solved the Braille puzzles I mentioned earlier, the 3 stone-circled doors open, allowing the player to enter them and encounter Registeel, Regice and Regirock after completing a series of commands to make the lair appear. In subsequent generations, the newer species of Pokemon have gradually become more ridiculous and overcomplicated, with some species that have been weirdly sexualized. The games in general have gone from the first generation having very simplistic animalistic designs with some sort of elemental twist to newer games having Pokemon that resemble sarcophaguses, ice cream cones, cogs, chandeliers, keys and even swords. Although admittedly they do seem to be getting back to more traditional animal based designs in the last couple of generations. When Sun and Moon came out, I was also excited by the idea of regional versions of beloved species such as Alola, Meowth and Exeggutor, and now with the Sword and Shield, Galarian, Weezing and Mr. Mime. I find this to be a much more interesting way of making new Pokemon without having to design another 100 plus Pokemon each generation, which would normally result in more and more absurd Pokemon being created when it seems like Game Freak has exhausted all originality. Not only does it mean they are getting those new designs that people want, but allows the player to use more Pokemon that may well be their favourites and gives them the option to use them as different types. For example, Cantonian Rattata is a normal type Pokemon, whereas Alolan Rattata is a dark type. This makes old Pokemon far more interesting and gives people more reason to want to use them. Going back to Ruby and Sapphire, the 2 games are situated between 2 other generations that are evidently much less creative than other generations. I love Gold and Silver, but they have 7 Pokédex entries that are baby versions of Gen 1 Pokemon and 10 entries that are evolutions of Gen 1 Pokemon, with a lot of the other entries having only 1 or 2 stages of evolution. I think even the biggest Pokemon fan can admit that it's quite a boring Pokédex. And then we have Diamond and Pearl, in which there is a whopping 22 dex entries that are evolutions of previous species and a further 7 baby versions of previous species. Compare this with Ruby and Sapphire, where Wynaut and Azurill are the only Pokemon based on previous Pokemon species, which goes to show how varied and unique Gen 3 is, especially being the second sequel to the original games. Ruby and Sapphire for me are at least on par with the designs of the first generation, and if we take my own personal nostalgia and love of the games into account, then it definitely surpasses the first generation as the pinnacle of design by not being too simple, but not also getting too over-designed or showing lack of creativity, with all of the species being believable as living creatures whilst existing realistically within the region. Music is an important part of any game. It helps to convey the emotion and feeling the developers want you to experience at that particular moment, and with a soundtrack of over 2.5 hours long, it's a massive part of the overall game. It's very rare that I ever actively listen to a video game soundtrack, but one of the soundtracks that I've always found myself listening to over the years is Ruby and Sapphire's. The score in these games is simply beautiful, consisting of music that binds together the beauty of the region yet remaining impactful when needed. The game features slightly updated versions of older tunes, but is mostly composed of new tracks which enhance the intensity of battle, the beauty of travelling, and the impact of major events while still maintaining the calmness of a Pokemon game. Take this track for instance that plays when the player starts riding a bike. It's one of, if not the best pieces of music in the entire series. The cycling theme not only has a beautiful and instantly memorable melody, but has a tempo that complements the speed at which the player achieves when cycling, while simultaneously being calming and elegant. Here's another one of my favourite tracks from the game, which is used as the main battle theme. On its own, it's a great piece of dramatic music, but when you have the audio of the battle UI pop into the screen, it adds a cool effect that somehow makes the music stand out even more. I have to admit that in terms of the music, the main enjoyment of it for me is because I played this game so much growing up that the tunes have been so deeply ingrained into my mind that nostalgia greatly heightens my appreciation of the music. When I listen to it, I can see myself in my head as a child playing this game and just wishing I could be in that world. I said earlier that the theme that plays when you use dive is an exceptional moment of the soundtrack, and for good reason. It immediately places you in this underwater environment where the tempo is slow, the melody is angelic, and the additional sound effects such as water bubbles create that sound that reminds you of being in a dream sequence from old movies. I'll also quickly mention here the surfing theme. I won't say it's necessarily the most memorable track in the game, but when I listen to it I can't help but feel joy. It plays out more like a song that might play at a ballroom dance, which could very well be the intention of the song's design. Surfing is where the player and his or her Pokemon are two bodies together, moving through an open area with grace, elegance, speed and love. If you read it in this way, it's a perfect reflection of the relationship between player and Pokemon and the two of them in that moment, although that could just be me over-reading that particular track. Of all the Pokemon games, I genuinely believe this score to be the most beautifully composed, to which I cannot compliment the composers enough. This is no better reinforced than during the end credits. After this huge journey the player has undertaken, we see our avatar cycling along through fields and cities to get home. The music plays and we see our rivals cycling alongside us. The Pokemon slideshow ends on our starter Pokemon and it's absolutely heartbreaking. For years and years I was crying out for a remake of Pokemon Ruby. Having previously remade the older generations, it was only a matter of time until Game Freak would surely announce a remake to Ruby and Sapphire, which of course they did. This is where the excitement that I had experienced with the original release of Ruby and Sapphire actually repeated itself. I saw the announcement and was excited at being able to return to Hoenn in an updated 3D world, but in the same vein as the original game's release, I didn't have a 3DS to play it on. In fact, I didn't end up getting a 3DS until about 2 years after those games came out, but when I finally bought a 3DS, I bought it with Pokemon Omega Ruby and New Super Mario Bros. 2. Almost the exact same circumstances as to how I got my Game Boy and Ruby 12 years previously. I'm happy to say that when I finally got around to playing through Omega Ruby, I was very impressed. It kept everything that made the original game what it was, but added a whole load of new features, updated the music, made the game look even prettier than it did before, and made Groudon even more of a badass powerhouse than he already was, with the introduction of primal forms. During Groudon and Kyogre's primal forms in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, you can see that during the animations in battle they actually have some sort of moving fluid that is visible on parts of their bodies, hinting that they take on a glass-like appearance in those forms, which is a fun and rewarding way to update those encounters and made it even more fun to catch. One of my favourite new updates to the game is the Eon Flute, which allows you to call Latios or Latias and be taken up into the sky, in which you can explore the world from a new perspective. The thing that makes this one of my favourite features is it because it allows the player the opportunity to find and catch regular and legendary Pokemon from other regions, instead of making you play either the other games or hope that someone will trade with you. None of this is to say necessarily that this is a better game than the originals, although there is a very strong argument for that given how well they update the core gameplay and introduce new systems. But to me, as nice as these features are, of the original and remake versions, the original versions still stand above the remakes. The remakes seem to be quite a lot easier, especially as you get given the experience share quite early in the game, meaning it's much easier to level up the rest of your party earlier instead of actually having to train them yourself. They also introduce a system that means after any major battle your opponent heals you, making long treks between Poké Centres nowhere near as tense or rewarding. A feature I found to get pretty annoying, almost as if Game Freak doesn't believe in the player's ability as a trainer. And so for all the things the remakes do well, the originals are far closer to an old school Pokemon experience and shows more faith in the player by not just handing out Pokemon heals and XP. Aside from these few gripes however, the rest of the game does the originals justice and are an amazing experience to have in their own right. As I'm sure you've noticed already by how I talk about these games in the context of being a child, I will be the first person to admit that a big reason for my love and admiration of Ruby and Sapphire will come from a deep-rooted nostalgia. When you break the game down into its different components and think about how they work together in a seamless, organic and believable way, it's hard to deny the legitimacy of these games being seen as the best in the entire series. especially considering how much of this generation revolutionized the series. The story is intense and climactic, the music is beautiful and emotional, the Pokemon species are varied and well designed, reflecting the region in which they live, the characters are interesting and unique, and the region of Hoenn itself is simply stunning. Pokemon Ruby takes a place as being in my top 3 games of all time, and I could play them endlessly without getting sick of them, as is proven by the fact that I did just that as a child and have continued to do so as an adult. None of this is to say that I dislike the other Pokemon games, but they all do things, or indeed don't do things, that for me lower them in terms of the quality, and so I don't hold them as highly. I should stress, however, that I do still enjoy the other games. Some less than others, but I do still enjoy them. I am, after all, a Pokemon fan since the beginning and always will be, which means that I am able to acknowledge and criticise their flaws when I see them, and Ruby and Sapphire is nearly without flaw. I've mentioned a couple of times that the only games that come close to Ruby and Sapphire aside from the remakes are Sun and Moon, as they do enough to make the game fresh and interesting, but still have an amazing world with great music and characters. And of course I love Red, Blue, Silver and Gold before them, but they are very similar games without doing enough to separate them from each other, and the stories lack any deeper sense of intrigue to them than Ruby and Sapphire do. The following generations definitely have some changes they make to try and evolve the series, like the introduction of triple battles, island trials instead of gyms, mega evolutions and some new ways to traverse the environment. Some of these work and some less so, but Ruby and Sapphire did an immense amount at the time that changed the series for the better, and they all work very well. Put simply, these games mean an awful lot to me. They are deeply rooted in my upbringing and continue to delight me well into adulthood, despite them being 17 years old at the time of recording. If I've managed to convince you in any way of how these games stand above the rest, then I'll be very happy. If not, then please let me know where you think I'm wrong, or if you would contest other games over these as being the best, as I'm sure there are many statements I've made here that you may not necessarily agree with. And my last note on the conclusion for the game is that this is just my opinion. I'm not right and I'm not wrong. If you have a different opinion, then that's entirely valid. At the end of the day, the Pokemon series is one of the most well-loved and yet divisive game series of all time. Many people will believe that Red and Blue are the best, or Ruby and Sapphire are the best, or X and Y are the best. And that's entirely correct. If that's what you believe, then that's right. And this is something that people don't remember about criticism. There is no right or wrong, there is no such thing as objectivity. It's entirely subjective. I know that I've just made this whole critique and said that I've objectively taken apart all of the things that make Ruby and Sapphire and objectively said what's good or bad about them, but even that's subjective. It's no way for me to be able to say to you that, okay, this is better over that because I believe it's right and therefore it's objective. So if you disagree, then that's entirely fine as well. If you've gone through this whole video, then thank you so much for watching. I made this video because I knew I wanted to make a video essay about a game that I love, and so I took inspiration from watching a lot of other essays recently and decided to make one about Pokemon, as Pokemon Ruby is one of my favourite games of all time. I chose this topic in particular because it's always something I firmly believe that Gen 3 has a character and identity unlike any of the other games, and was amazed that no one else had done a video covering the specific subject before, at least none that I could find on YouTube. Thank you again for taking the time to watch this video. I'm thinking about my next upload being a critique of Paper Mario the Origami King, as I played that recently, and although it wouldn't be such a long video because I don't have as much to talk about because I'll be talking about one specific aspect of the game, that is something that I'd like to cover, and so let me know if that's something you'd like to see too. Thank you once again for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon.